almost tripled over the last 50 years. And the demand for different types of materials is increasing as we speak. Material productivity, unfortunately, has not kept pace. So this whole debate about decoupling economic growth from material use is not really happening today, unfortunately. Here you can see how the footprint differs from high-income countries to low-income countries. There is a difference of more than a factor of 10. So it's a very uneven distribution, you could say. Another fact from the International Resource Panel is that extraction industries are responsible for more than half of the world's carbon emissions and 80% of biodiversity loss. And if we then go to climate scientists, they tell us we have to halve carbon emissions by every decade until 2050 if we are going to have a chance to live up to the Paris Agreement. And since materials is a significant part of the emissions generated, of course, this is very, very important to discuss. Another piece of information from the International Resource Panel is we have made an estimate about infrastructure development in the world over the next 30 years. And we come to the conclusion that because of the rapid increase in urban infrastructure in emerging economies, in low-income economies, we're going to build as much urban infrastructure from now until 2050 as we have built in the world hitherto. So that puts things in a perspective. And if we use today's technologies, today's materials, it's not going to work. The carbon budget will be exhausted. Here you can see for different materials the estimated demand: steel, plastics, as you can see, a rapid increase. Aluminium, cement is the same. Even when we look at textiles and clothing, it's the same picture, a rapid increase in demand. The same goes for electronics. We know, of course, that most of the expansion will take place in middle-income and low-income countries. And hence, industrialized countries, we have a tremendous responsibility to help develop sustainable production and consumption systems. Here you have the graph which tells about well-being going up and resource consumption going down. We are nowhere near that, unfortunately. And one of the problems, if we look at Europe, is that we use materials primarily only once. They are designed for use once, and then they end up somewhere as waste. Now, what is a circular economy? It's not well defined. To me, it is a metaphor for extended product life, for recycling, reuse, remanufacture, repair, maintenance, from moving to selling stuff to offering services, to utilize better what is already produced, a sharing economy, and probably most important, a focus on material stocks and to maintain them rather than looking for material flows. Now, there are many barriers to change, to move in the right direction. In my opinion, these are the most important ones. It's too cheap to use nature. We don't pay for the externalities. And therefore, the market for secondary materials is poorly developed in many areas. It's simply less expensive to source virgin materials as compared to secondary materials. Very often we have design criteria that are not geared towards reuse and recycling. Look at plastics. We have too many different qualities. Standardization is lacking. We have more or less linear business models. Businesses want to sell more and often. And materials have not been a priority in climate mitigation policies. And public procurement, which represents roughly 20% of the economy all over the world, has been too passive because the public sector could drive the market in the right direction. Now, the question was asked, where are the Nordic countries? Well, there has been a very uneven pace in the Nordic countries moving towards the circular economy. Finland is in a pole position. They started early on and has developed a roadmap, which I think is very interesting, very detailed, and they have some experience already. The other Nordic countries are lagging behind, but Sweden, my own country, has recently launched a strategy which is well designed, but now the devil is, of course, in the implementation. If you look at the Nordic countries, you could say that there are some historic achievements that go in the right direction. We have district heating systems. We have quite a lot of CHP, combined heat and power. That moves us in a more energy efficient direction. We have had early bans on landfilling, and we are quite advanced when it comes to digital technologies, which of course are very much involved in the creation of new business models. A question to put in this context is, of course, what is the role of member states in the European Union versus the European Union? I believe we need multi-level policy interventions. We need legislation in Brussels, but also at member state level. But the critical decisions, in my opinion, have to be made at the European Union level, because we have a lot of trade going on, and it's impossible for one country to move towards circularity without the others going in the same direction. What is positive here is that the European Green Deal includes most of the necessary measures to promote material efficiency and circularity. The European Union or Commission launched a Circular Economy Action Plan, a new one, a couple of months ago. And here you can see on the screen the main components of it. A sustainable product policy framework, meaning that there will be requirements on new products put on the market. We are going to expand the use of the Eco-Design Directive, which hitherto has been mainly focusing on energy efficiency. We're going to get a circular electronics initiative, very, very critical. Look at all the computers, all the smartphones that are used maybe for 12 months, 18 months, and then being discarded. We're going to get a new regulation for batteries. We will have reviews of directives on packaging, plastics, microplastics, end-of-life vehicles, textiles. All this is very, very important, done at the regional level. We'll have a strategy for sustainable built environment, also very important. 40% roughly of the material throughput in our societies take place in buildings and construction. And finally, this is a global issue. We need also global agreements, in particular on plastics. I would submit, and here I will end, that we haven't had a specific Nordic approach so far. But I think Nordic countries could and should lead by example. Firstly, at least Sweden, Finland, and Norway, we are forested countries. We should, of course, make use of forest materials to substitute fossil-based materials. We have also very good opportunities for renewable energy, not least wind energy. We should, because of our digitization having advanced quite far, we should be able to develop business models based on digital solutions. We should also be able to move rapidly from products to services. And we have some companies, one example is IKEA, who are in the forefront of trying to develop new business models. IKEA, for instance, has adopted 8 so-called design principles, which will take them a long way towards circularity. Finally, we should, of course, work proactively together in Brussels on a number of issues: taxes, agriculture, design, and public procurement. And I would particularly stress tax issues, because without reform, reducing taxes on labor and increasing them of the use of nature, I don't think we are going to move towards circularity as we would like to. Finally, I have mentioned a last point on this list: development cooperation. This is a global issue. We have, of course, to bring in developing countries and make them part of this and help them develop sustainable technologies as much as we can. Thank you.
Anders, thank you very much indeed. As ever, beautifully concise, but also stark in terms of the challenges we face. And so often we maybe sit in our bubble thinking we're part of change and transformation in a world that still seems to be very largely just consumption orientated. Thank you for that, and thank you for also beginning to point some pointers towards that Nordic approach. As we open up the discussion, I really want to test and think what it is distinctively that we could be doing that offers us an advantage in serving the world in that transformation process, and some hints of that are already there. Thank you very much for that. One of the things that is really sometimes the Cinderella, but is so important in thinking about that circularity model, and I like Anders' thought about a metaphor, covers so many things, is its link with climate change, energy consumption, and other issues around that. And I'm delighted we're joined this morning by Stina Klingvall, who's Senior Consultant at Material Economics, consultancy firm very much focusing on resource and climate topics. Stina, great to have you with us. And I think as we're trying to really think about the importance of circularity and moving forward and the Nordic approach, I think you're particularly interested to highlight that link to the compellingly worrying and important topic of the link with climate change. So Stina, great to have you with us and interested to hear your feed into this conversation.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very pleased to be here this morning. So I'm going to, as you said, talk about the connection between the circular economy and the climate targets and climate mitigation. So the circular economy perhaps didn't sort of originate from the climate agenda necessarily, but as we've looked at this the last couple of years, there is a very strong connection between the circular economy and climate mitigation, sort of bridged by the whole resource efficiency topic. So it's a very strong connection that I would like to talk about today. And also it turns out that circular economy is almost a necessity to reach the climate targets that we have set for ourselves, because we really need to use our materials and resources much more efficiently to be able to reach climate targets while sort of still having sort of the projected growth that we are seeing in the economy. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and talk about the EU and the global level, just to sort of perhaps create even more a sense of urgency for the circular economy transformation. And so the results that I will be showing today were published in our 2018 report that's called actually The Circular Economy, a Powerful Force for Climate Mitigation. So which we did a comprehensive analysis looking into the link between circular economy and greenhouse gas emission reductions. So that is sort of if anyone is interested in reading more later on, that's where you'll find some of these charts and a lot more sort of around the whole this topic. So perhaps we could go to the next slide, Sarah. Thank you very much. Thanks. So globally, the production of key materials, including, as we looked at here, steel, plastics, aluminium, and cement, account for around 21% of the global emissions, which is a significant share. And the emissions from these materials are not only significant, but also notoriously difficult to reduce. In transportation, for example, we do have a much clearer agenda on how to reduce emissions. We're looking at electrification, biofuels, and also in energy, there's a vision of the transition towards renewables. But when it comes to materials, that transition story is much less articulated today. And the emissions from materials are very difficult to reduce in many ways. If we're looking at steel, for example, require completely new processes, as the CO2 is sort of inherently built into the process production of these materials. So there we're looking at, for example, hybrid with the direct reduction of steel, and for cement, CCS is required for full sort of emission abatement, and plastics is perhaps even more difficult in many ways, because the fossil carbon is built into the materials themselves. So we are seeing this big share of emissions which are very difficult to abate on the supply side. And what we do see, though, is that the demand side of a more circular economy for these materials have been much less discussed than looking at the potential on the supply side. So even though a more resource efficient economy could help reduce the demand for these materials by recycling and more resource efficient use, which would then mean that we need to produce much less of these materials with these new, often expensive technologies that are not yet commercially mature either. So we do see that the demand side, perhaps, of looking at materials emissions is has been much less in focus, but it's nevertheless very important and could be a very important contributor to how to abate these emissions. So if we go to the next slide, which I do believe you will recognize from Anders' presentation as well. So if we're looking ahead, we can see that the materials demand is not set to flatten or decrease in any way in a sort of business as usual scenario, but rather set to double or even grow 4 times for some of these materials until the end of the century. And this is very much, of course, driven by economic growth and population increase. So what we do need is to be able to, as I believe you said, Anders, as well, decouple the need for primary materials with economic growth, because as you can imagine, sort of this type of materials production growth would lead to similar increases in GHG emissions from materials. And this, I think, highlights the urgent need for a much more resource efficient economy in terms of materials use. And that is where the circular economy comes in. So perhaps we can again go to the next slide. So tying back quickly to the production of these materials, we can also see that the energy efficiency and zero carbon energy, which are perhaps the traditional abatement levers that are being looked at, and when it comes to buildings and energy, that is often takes us very far. But for materials, this will not be enough to fit materials within the carbon budget for a below 2 degree scenario, simply because a lot of the emissions from materials production comes from so-called process emissions. So this poses a great challenge where we see that both the circular economy and new processes are required to meet the climate targets for materials, simply because the scale of the challenge in decarbonizing these materials productions without sort of reducing or at least flattening the demand growth is huge and would require enormous amounts of low carbon electricity and biomass resources. So there is simply an urgent need for a much more resource efficient economy. So if we go to the next slide again, so the circular economy, as I think also Anders said, it has no sort of broad definition today, but here is how we look at it, which I would like to sort of go through a little bit, because I do think this framework is very helpful. So we look at it in 3 parts. We sort of creates an equation for all of us engineers who feel very calm and comfortable with that. So what we do see in this first box to the left, we look at materials recirculation as a very integral part of circular economy, and that is perhaps what people think mostly about, recycling. That is sort of one of the flagships, if you will, of the circular economy. So, and why does this have a link to the climate agenda as well? So recycled materials generally have a much lower CO2 footprint than virgin production, because the materials have already been refined, and remelting and sort of reprocessing uses much less energy, and it's also often easier to abate these emissions compared to the much more sort of difficult processes in the virgin production. So that is one thing. But there's also another thing, and that is that recycled materials, when they are recycled to a high quality that can replace virgin materials, that also reduces the need for virgin materials to the extent that the recycled ones can can replace those. So that is the first one. So there we can sort of reduce the greenhouse gas impact per ton of material, if you will. And then the second one, which we want to include here, is product material efficiency. And that is about how much material you use per product. And here it's a lot of sort of traditional, if you will, efficiency measures, such as less production of waste, avoid over-specification in designs, for example, in constructions or in, I believe, packaging is one aspect here as well. There's huge over-packaging. So that sort of exceeds the required amount of packaging to provide the function that it actually is there to provide. So there's a sort of, if you will, traditional measures in many ways, but there is also reuse of component and improved design. And here is sort of the product designers have a challenge in sort of both developing new high-strength materials that can do the same job with less amount of materials, but also new design principles and variations in size, just sort of really come up with product designs that are efficient in materials use, much like we've looked at energy efficiency for the last decades and really improved the energy consumption of products. The material efficiency is equally as important. So, and the third one is circular business models. So here is where fewer products can be needed to provide the same useful service. And this is typically sharing economy business models and product as a service, but also sort of designing products for longer lifetimes, for durability, and being able to repair and remanufacture products just to extend the lifespan and sort of require less frequent repurchasing and so on. And this one, I think, is very much also fueled by digitalization, the sharing economy and products as a service, but also simply business model innovation and for companies to rethink how they are creating value. So combining this and looking at then the equation, as I mentioned earlier, we can see that these three elements of circular economy together combine the GHG impact of per useful service. So this is really this decoupling that we're after that can be done in sort of three parallel steps, if you will. So then we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So combining these three elements of the circular economy for these four materials, steel, plastics, aluminium, and cement, our analysis shows that a more circular economy can reduce EU emissions from materials by 56%, which is a huge contribution to climate targets. And that is one that should be very much welcomed. And also then goes hand in hand with a more resource efficient economy with less demands put on nature to provide new materials, new resources constantly. So we do see that this potential is very big, but it is also difficult to unlock. So I will be talking about that a little bit more on the later in this presentation. But here we do see that materials recirculation, more efficient materials use, and new business models can have a great impact.
Stina, just another minute or two.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, great. So we can move to the next slide. So on this one, I just wanted to highlight we produced a first cost curve for the circular economy levers. And we do see sort of on the left-hand side, we see the levers that are actually cost effective, but that are hindered by behavioral change or coordination along the value chain and so on. So these have sort of, if you will, in more diffuse obstacles. But on the right-hand side, we have the other half that is hindered by economics. So these are just simply not cost effective in today's environment. So we can skip ahead, and I think if we can jump over this slide that comes here, and this will be the final slide. So to realize the potential of the circular economy, we really need to who sets targets and create a common vision for the material system in 2050 or 2100. Where are we heading? And also establish a circularity policy agenda, which I think has happened a lot these last 2 or 3 years. But there is still a need for new interventions, and the policy field here is still very nascent in terms of circular economy. And I think there's a lot to learn from the energy efficiency, which has been very successful. So perhaps the next wave now is materials efficiency. So with that, I think we can skip 2 slides ahead, and I will just like to say thank you very much and looking forward to the discussions.
Stina, thank you very much. And some very powerful information that reinforces that moving towards circular economy has a crucial linkage to the issue of bearing down on climate change and the climate crisis that we are facing. Also, that there is some extraordinary work going on within the Nordic countries in analysing and understanding what the potentials and possibilities are. So thank you very much for that. Recently, the Nordic Council of Ministers put out a vision that the Nordics should be the most integrated and sustainable region in the world by 2030. A great vision. One of the things emerging out of that was the setting up of the Nordic Innovation, which is very much looking at supporting and initiating projects, particularly within the business sector around transition to circular economy. And delighted we're joined this morning by Marthe Haugland, who's Senior Innovation Advisor at Nordic Innovation, who will be an advocate of the Nordic approach. So Marthe, great to have you with us, and really interested to hear your clarion cry saying Nordic innovation. This is the Nordic approach. This is what is going on, and maybe a little bit more of what's needed. And then we'll open up the discussion after that. So over to you, Marthe.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you both Stina and setting the stage where we are and where we should be. So I just want to say a few words about Nordic Innovation. We are, as Peter said, an organization under the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is the intergovernmental cooperation in the Nordic countries. And our budget per year, which is perhaps important to remember, is about 90 million Norwegian kroners. So it's quite a small budget, but still good. We have the Ministers for Business and Trade, who give us a Nordic cooperation program for 4 years, and we're in the middle of one now. And next slide, please. Just setting the stage a little bit for what is distinctly Nordic, which is the Nordic values that I think, or that we work from what we have, is this openness we have in the society. We have trust, we have quite an equal society, and we have sustainability at the heart, as both Anders showed that we have done quite a few things, even though we have to do very much more, of course. Change, please. And another thing is that we are, in the Nordics, are very small countries, each and one of us, but together we're the 12th largest economy in the world, which I think personally gives us, opportunities, but also a sense of duty that we should do something, because what we do actually impacts on the world. Next, please. And then this is the vision that Peter was mentioning. Last year, the Nordic Council of Ministers came with this vision of 2030, the most integrated and sustainable region in the world, which is quite a big and fluffy vision, but it's supposed to be, they're specifying a little bit more, saying it should be a green Nordic region, circular and bio-based. It should be a competitive Nordic region, so we should still be competitive, but it should also be a sustainable, a socially sustainable region where we have equal opportunities, inclusion, and interconnected region. So that is a very important point as well. But I also think that this in a sense, shows very well what the circular economy is about. It's about green, competitive, and socially inclusive region. Next, please. And perhaps also to say, so this is the prime ministers in the Nordic countries, they decided on this vision together with the Nordic Council of Ministers. So it is kind of anchored at the top level in the Nordic countries. So, and then back to Nordic innovation and our work a little bit. In 2018, when we got the new cooperation program, we looked at what the Nordic countries were doing. We looked at the strengths of the Nordic countries, which is, like Anders said, digitalization, a lot of nature-based or raw materials in the Nordic countries. We also have a population which is quite adaptable and quite, because we have this trust in society, we also have this perhaps this need, or we trust, you know, that we are going in the right direction, and also trust what our public organizations say, public institutions. But looking at the World Sustainability Goals, of course, we are doing very well on some of them, but especially on number 12, responsible consumption and production, we are not doing very well at all. We are the highest consumption in the world, and we should really do something about this. I think that, so we also, when we decided this program, focusing on industries and businesses, which is in our Nordic innovation mandate, it's building a competitive, value creative Nordic businesses. We decided to focus on this number 12 of the UN Sustainability Goals. Next, please. And within this, we decided that our ambition should be that we should be front runners in the circular economy. We should encourage organizations, companies to work on the circular economy with the focus on being on businesses. We wanted to help develop Nordic solutions that can be used in the Nordics, but of course can be shared with the rest of the planet. And to do this, we thought that we should build a very strong ecosystem in the Nordics, bringing the actors together to make them know each other, to share knowledge, and to work together. Next, please. And in this, we said, okay, well, let's focus on four main areas: competence, new solutions, circular cities, and ecosystems. I'll go through. Next, please. And within this, we had just this spring, so we have 60 million for this project, for this program for 4 years. So it's not a lot of money, but it can spur action. So we are about kickstarting initiatives, and then the actors have to take it on. So in these 7 projects that we funded this summer, it goes from the value chains in the textile industry to new standards on reporting for non-financial data for small companies, to industrial symbiosis, to educating the new leaders, the students that will be the new leaders on circular economy and materials, to look at recycling processes for batteries, electric batteries in the island nations of the Nordic countries, and reducing the metal waste, as well as seeing how can we help Nordic municipalities in moving towards circular economy. Next, please. And then we have this program, which is about the circular business models in the Nordic manufacturing industry. And here you can see all the 5 circular business models that both Anders and Stina mentioned. And what we've done is that we've taken, together with Sitra in Finland and Accenture, we've made this program for Nordic manufacturing industry, which is about 38% of the industry in the Nordics. And we've tried, through workshop, help them understand how they can actually change their linear business model to a circular one. Next, please. And just showing you here a circular value chain in the manufacturing industry. You can see that you have, you know, that you have so many actors and new actors that you need to bring into your value chain in order to change to a circular business model. And this is, of course, a very big difference for companies to think about, but by bringing, when recruiting to this program, we try to find actors within each of the value chain positions in order so that they could talk together and see things from each other's perspectives, trying to orchestrate an ecosystem or a value chain that they can then go circular with. Next, please, which is just the kind of, these are Nordic frontrunner companies, I would say. They are in this trying to work to find the best circular business model that they can now, and hopefully we'll have some pilot and then scaling later next year, but it's very good. Then moving on to other, next slide please, and other programs that we have. We're also launching this Nordic Circular Playbook. It is about how you as a company can change your circular or your business model to a circular one. So this is a tool. It has practical examples, it has Nordic business cases, and it is for this manufacturing industry. And it's based on a playbook that Citra made in 2018, where we just kind of updated it and made it more Nordic. As you say, Peter, I have a Nordic perspective on this. And then perhaps the next slide, which is then this another ecosystem that we decided to build. You have really this very passionate people and knowledge about people who are about the circular economy in the Nordic transition. And even though it's a Nordic circular hotspot, they are of course also connected to the rest of the world and the rest of the circular hotspots of the world. They have partners in the Nordic countries and they are developing now. So this is also a kind of trying to bring a movement into the Nordic countries in order to transition. Next slide, please. And then we have this other project as well, which is also about helping companies on how to transition to the circular economy. You have to explore the opportunities, you have to innovate, and you have to act. So, circular economy, the kind of take we have on it is that you should try and then fail and then try again. Because if you want to make everything perfect, it's going to take too long. But it's also about, if you want to go circular, you have to do it together with somebody or with a lot of people, both country-wise and company-wise. I think there's still a lot to do in the Nordics, or there is clearly a lot to do in the Nordics. The Norwegian economy is 2.4% circular, according to the Circular Economy Circularity Gap report that was just launched early this autumn. So there's so much to do. And next slide, please. Just by finishing off to say that we've tried to take the company perspective into this and to try to help the companies move in order to be competitive in the world, but also in order to be much more sustainable and giving the consumers more sustainable choices, perhaps. So I'll end here. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Marthe, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for flying the flag for the Norwegian approach and showing some of the activities that are taking place.
Nordic approach.
Sorry, what did I say?
Norwegian.
Oh, goodness me. That second coffee hasn't quite kicked in yet. So we've got about 30 minutes for a conversation, and I think I really want to focus on two things. I also, in that conversation, want to bring back in Tomas Rydberg, as he may want to contribute. And also we have Elin Larsson, live online program director at Resource SIP, very much experienced sustainability practitioner. I think there are two areas. I want to come on a little bit later just to the salutary thoughts around COVID-19. So I'm just going to hold that for a moment. But I want to throw back to you a proposition to all of our speakers, discussants. And if you're part of the webinar, please use the chat to offer some thoughts. What I see looking in is that there's an ecosystem of fascinating, extraordinary, interesting activities going on within the 5 Nordic countries, some coordinated, distinctive things in different countries. There's some really great stuff going on, right through from the research, through to product development, through to business models, through to integration, all sorts of things going on. That is brilliant, and we're kind of getting it. And I love Anders' explanation of circular economy. In a sense, it's a metaphor, an umbrella that embraces a whole range of different activities. There is no doubt we understand that transition is essential. What I'm trying to would like to throw back to you is it could be that within the Nordic countries, we're doing all we can with the resources we have. We're doing all we can, and it's great, and just give it time and things will happen. My perception is that time is running out. Our ability as organizations, businesses to shift and change within this appears to be lagging way behind the urgency that presents itself. So my challenge to you in taking the Nordic approach further forward is almost to say, is there something bigger? Is there a big idea, a big approach, a real fist through the screen that says, we get the fact that we've got to do something extraordinary rather than iterative, and look to the Nordic bloc to be those visionary leaders. So I'm inviting you to try and imagine something more significant than the amazing stuff that's going on at the moment. Now, and I'm going to, whoever puts their hand up first can offer me an initial response, but who would like to come in? Is this something we really ought to be pushing another step further forward? Anders, start us off.
Well, I think the best way to really respond to that question is to ask yourself, why is the production model linear? Why isn't it circular? Because it seems so obvious that it should be circular. Well, it's linear because we don't pay for the externalities. It's linear because business models are geared towards selling more and selling often. It's linear because design has not thought about it. I had a meeting with leading Swedish designers a couple of months ago. They said, nobody ever asked us for sustainability design. We had other requirements for the design community. So here you have some critical issues, and I think the cost structure is fundamental. And if the Nordic countries could push what I would call an ecological tax reform or a tax shift, they could, for instance, start by removing VAT on recycled and reused materials. That would be a fantastic push in the right direction. And then move on reducing taxes on labor and increasing it on use of nature. Then the response from macroeconomists would be, well, you know, after a while, that tax base would disappear. Right. Well, then you just have to increase the tax. We have to do something about the cost structure. Otherwise, this will just continue. And circularity will be happening here and there, but not in the economy at large.
Brilliant. And interesting, didn't Sweden, someone's just put a comment on saying, didn't Sweden reduce VAT on second-hand objects? I mean, interesting. I don't know when anyone has it.
On repair.
On repair.
Yeah, which is a good step.
And do we know whether that's, whether there's any impact analysis of whether that's had any impact?
I don't think we have, there is no research yet, but it was a signal to the economy, which I think is starting to have effect.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, I think that feels like a major proposition coming from you, Anders. Other comments? Elin, I wonder, we haven't heard from you. Good morning to you. Great that you're able to join us, if you'd like to unmute. And I'm looking probably for quite big ideas emerging here.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. Well, I was sitting here thinking from a business perspective. I've been working in the fashion industry for many years, and trying to transform businesses to circular business models, and come up with at least 4 big challenges from a business perspective. One is that we have optimized the system for linear models. And when something is optimized, it's so hard to change, right? We have been working in silos, not only within the companies, between each department, but also within the whole value chain. Everyone is expert within their field.
Yeah.
And that to transform to circularity, we need to collaborate on all fronts. And then we have mindsets. I mean, both within the companies, you're used to work in a certain way. The customers are used to buy new stuff when I go into a party or whatever. So we have to work with mindsets. And then I think the biggest issue might be time. We all think we lack time, right? But you need time to come up, to create awareness, to come up with new ideas and to test them. And the time issue will be hard for us to solve here. But with talking about the other challenges, I totally agree with Anders regarding the cost structure, because today it's always cheaper and easier to make the bad choices. And as long as it's that way, we're not going to reach that tipping point. We're going to have front runners doing, the small things. But to reach a tipping point, we need policy that supports. So I totally agree with that. But on the other aspect that I'm thinking of is awareness. We have companies that really do want to create a change, but they don't know how to, and that this comes up in many different forums. So I would suggest we should have free education for all organizations, companies, in terms on how to transform to circular business models. And to really push the products and in the right direction, I would like to propose that we demand traceability and transparency. And to be able to do that, I would also love to see that we would open up LCA data on products, because today it's really expensive to get LCA data and for all your different products. So if we could open up that would really make it easier to compare products, and it would speed up the process of the transparency and traceability.
I love it. Thank you very much indeed. I'm feeling quite a compelling, fresh agenda. I'm going to come on to who might be the actors that actually really make this leap. We seem to be able to find a €1 trillion to be able to sort out COVID, but we seem to be able to find 60 million to support Nordic innovation. So I'm intrigued at the moment about how that pressure comes for that breakthrough at scale of activity. I wonder, Tomas, whether you want to add something into our big shift Nordic approach beyond or reinforcing what we've already heard.
Yes, I was thinking that I might add a little bit of a researcher's perspective, because I'm working for a research institute, and we are not only researchers, we are also trying to do something to make some action happen in our institute. So just as one example that's very in the middle of the discussion we're having here, we have operated since a number of years a project consortium which is now setting up textile automated sorting facility and in the south of Sweden. I won't go into the details of that, but everything, or a lot of the times when we have looked into recycling and various other aspects of circular economy, the problem of, let's say, competing with an optimized linear system becomes so obvious, and then it can be broken down into several aspects, and some of the other speakers have touched upon several of them, so I don't think I will repeat that. But obviously, the linear system has been optimized over several hundred years, you might say, and actually quite often also pushed the more circular systems to the side, or replaced the circular systems, because I think you can probably identify a number of important areas or several sectors where you have had previously a more circular system in place, and now it's more being replaced by a linear one. So that's an obvious issue that I want to push and highlight. And then I was thinking about the a little bit the Nordic dimension, if you may call it that. And I think Anders touched upon the issue that we need to have action on multiple levels here. And that's also one of the key points here, that yes, we are quite much, let's say, in our legislative frameworks, we are much bound to agreements in the European Union, but there is also a certain degree of freedom on the national level. And of course, the Nordic region, as let's say represented here by Marthe in this particular conference, also has, it's more of a collaboration approach, and the formal, let's say, legislation and taxation and whatnot power is not on that level. So maybe that's like a kind of a drawback if you look at the Nordic as a kind of region stuck a little bit in between the national powers of legislative powers and the, let's say, European level. But we also one can broaden that to the global context, and of course what happens on the level of United Nations and potentially other international organizations like OECD, for example, is also important. So we have to work on all levels here. And of course, then if we leave, let's say, the official or the public organizations, Anders is showing showing a finger. He wants to comment, I guess. I just wanted to say finally that industries are working across all these levels of public administrations and governments, and value chains are global. So it has to be going all the way from global all the way down to local, basically. Thank you for now.
Right. Thank you very much. Anders, I wonder if you just wanted to come in on that.
No, I wanted to say, yeah, I agree with most what was said, and I think the global dimension is very important. I'm a member of the board of Swedish SIDA, the Swedish International Development Authority, and we have only recently started to try to understand how can we build capacity in low-income countries and help them to move in this direction. But there is a lot of hesitation within those countries because they earn a lot of export revenue on exporting raw materials and commodities. And some of them see the circularity sort of dimension as a threat. So we have to show them that it makes sense also for them. So that's a very important issue. No, what I wanted to say is the following. We have to measure the right things. And today, because we use GDP as the main sort of indicator, we measure flows of everything. The more materials that flows, the higher the GDP. And if we now want to move in a different direction and keep stocks, maintain stocks as much as possible, and to use products and materials longer, then we need new measurements. Then the GDP logic doesn't work. It doesn't work for many other reasons also. It's a totally quantitative measurement, not the qualitative. So we have to develop new measurements and indicators. And by the way, Marthe, this circularity gap report, I don't give much for it because it only measures primarily recycling activity in the economy. And recycling is but one of many aspects. So if, for instance, you keep products alive longer, you recycle less, and then all of a sudden your economy, according to that logic, is less circular. I would say it's more circular because you maintain the stocks. So I think we have a lot of definitions and indicator work to do here.
Okay, I'd like to bring Marthe in, maybe to react to that, but also I'm looking for that. I'm still trying to work out that there seems to be a lot of good thought and I've got a lot of good stuff going on, but it feels to me that it's all happening at a certain pace, that it's a different pace to what we need for transformation, so we secure our place on the planet in the future. So I'm still looking for that big push that could come from the Nordic countries. But Marthe, whether you want to respond, and I'm interested to hear if I suddenly gave you 3 billion euro to support your activities or whatever, what would the big idea that really takes us to the next transition stage be?
Well, I think I would take some of the ideas from the other panelists here, and I think that also one important, very important element is to bring the public institutions on board as well, because I think that companies in the Nordics are at least starting to see, or you have a drive from some of the business leaders, both in Denmark and Norway and probably the other countries, and demanding stricter regulations from the public. But as long as the stricter regulation is not coming, you won't see the big mass, as also mentioned earlier. I would love to have 3 billion. I would certainly, and I think this education and perhaps also using, what about all the engineers that are working in all companies, in all public sector and if they don't know about this circular economy, how can make all savings, and how could you use employees, organizations, trade unions, and these kind of things to help drive the change as well.
Okay. Right, and that links into that earlier thought about education to all companies. Well, maybe education to all undergraduates and graduates about all your thinking should be underpinned by this transition ethic and urgency. Okay, Stina, I think you wanted to come in about a thought about Nordic collaboration.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I wanted to sort of connect to the thing you mentioned about speed and sort of how to accelerate the transition. I do think as a lot of the sort of the transition to circular economy is so complex, especially regarding sharing business models. We need sort of collaboration across across the entire value chain, across functions in companies and so on. And I would say today incentives for this are very weak. There is very little policy incentive to transition to a sharing business model. There is potentially sort of emerging a little bit of consumer behavior. We did see sort of Unilever come out with a new very sort of ambitious circularity agenda just recently. So, I mean, there is a little bit of growing consumer pressure, but incentives today are weak. So I do think that a sort of a step change in policy is almost required for a circular transition. And I do think that where the Nordic companies could do a lot of cross-learning in terms of policy development for the circular economy, because some things are happening in the EU, but sort of waste legislation and some other sort of bits of legislation are quite national. And I think just sort of speeding up the transition by learning of it from each other there in developing policies to actually create these incentives. Because I think that if the incentives are there, the collaboration will come. So I would sort of like to turn the stake, if you will. So I think that's an important area.
That's great. It feels to me, if I add in all the suggestions and ideas that have come out of this conversation, and please do carry on pushing them in through the chat from out there, we have the ingredients for a kind of compelling push forward. We know what, I think we probably know what the answers are. We also know the scale of the challenge of what is resisting the breakthrough. So I just want to take it one stage forward to say, okay, I get all the things that are being suggested. If we were to, why not the Nordic countries being on this planet, being the place of hope, of dramatic mind and action transformation. Everyone else is fighting each other. We've got conflicts, we've got politics. You've got amazing underpinning values, as were mentioned by Marthe. You've got the platform for doing something extraordinary. And I'm just still lacking a sense of, if, I don't know, 20,000 academics 15,000 companies, 1 million consumers and 200 politicians all signed up to something. I'm just trying to work out whether there is the possibility of I don't know, a thunderclap. It took a 15-year-old Swedish girl to do something extraordinary to mobilize young people. Is there something within the Nordic possibility that could be on a earth, I was going to say earth-shattering scale, but no, an earth-restoring scale? Or is this just going to be a continuation of kind of iterative, worthy, good, iterative action? So I just want anyone to come in who thinks we might actually be able to do something highly significant.
But Peter, what you seem not to factor in is that this is a systemic issue.
Mm-hmm.
There is not a silver bullet. There are many silver bullets, or there have to be many silver. But I continue to tell you, and let me take one example. I talked to the leadership of IKEA a couple of weeks ago, and they said, as long as the cost structure is what it is, when we take on to try to recycle plastics, if virgin plastics continue to be less expensive, we cannot continue doing it because our competitors will outsmart us because they will use the cheaper virgin plastic. So again, some kind of mechanism to make sure that virgin materials are not cheaper than secondary materials is, I think, a first step to take.
And the alliance that actually makes that happen practically, is that a business, political, academic alliance, a collaboration?
I think the business community should send a clearer message to the political community.
Okay.
Those who, I was on a panel with politicians this morning, earlier on, and one thing we concluded was that the silos that Elin referred to, they are also in politics. People who are responsible for taxation issues, they know very little about the circularity aspects. They deal with taxes, revenues, etc. And those who are dealing with circularity, they know very little about taxes. So you need cooperation there as well. But it is the political system that has to take the decision.
Right. Okay. Elin.
Yeah, and I just want to support Anders in that. And I think that is one of the biggest and most important issues that we need to be able to transform. And to just give you another example, looking at the textile industry, we could halve the environmental impact by 2030 by only using best available technique that's out there already today, but it's not being used enough. And why is that? Because it's still, as we spoke about the cost structure, it's too cheap to make the bad choices. So we do need policies and legislation that and economical incentives that will get businesses to use the techniques that's already out there.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to, again, I think if we look through, and there's some interesting comments through, and I'll let people just have a look as they come through, issues around procurement and all sorts of other issues coming through. I just want for a moment to bring in the COVID-19. We're sort of, wow, let's move forward on this. We are in the grip of a global pandemic. There are some people who are saying that in terms of social and economic impacts, we haven't seen anything yet. This is going to bring economies, and particularly economies of some of the weaker countries, to their knees. Those who can't borrow money on very low beneficial terms. I'm just interested whether anyone has a perspective on whether this world that we are going to be in for the next, could it be 2 years? I don't know. And then some things may have changed as a result of that. Just any observations as to whether COVID-19 presents, as well as so many threats to individuals and businesses, real serious opportunities that, again, potentially the Nordic countries might be able to capitalize on a really serious situation? Does anyone just want to offer a COVID-19 perspective into this conversation? Stina.
I could perhaps offer sort of two thoughts. So, like, I think one thing that perhaps sort of being in a crisis as we are, I suppose the time for behavioral change could be an opportunity, because everything is already changing completely. So we see like teleworking has exploded, people are cycling, which is something that have been sort of politicians and others have been trying to push for many years, but now something completely unexpected happens and people are all of a sudden changing their behaviors overnight. So I think perhaps that is something that could be sort of, there's possibility to seize an opportunity for that. But something that is a very sort of much more challenging that I would like to tie into the discussion on plastics recycling earlier. So we have seen the price drop in oil prices over the spring, following both the market share war obviously earlier, and then the COVID pandemic sort of was really taking a hit on recycling of plastic. So if the business case before was tricky, it's now even more trickier. So sort of it's I just wanted to sort of emphasize that in this, thanks to the COVID pandemic, it's even more important to support recycling. And that could be sort of, there are many ways to do that. It could be sort of quotas, lead markets, or anything. But so plastics recycling is one thing that has been
all right. Does anyone else want to just come on? Yeah, Anders, related to particularly COVID.
I think, first of all, what this pandemic has shown us, and I hope most citizens, is how interconnected we are. And that a virus in Wuhan has traveled all over the world and affected all of our societies. But this is only one of the potential shocks. Climate change, ecosystem decline are two others, and they are related to circularity. So hopefully we will have an increased awareness, and I think I'm seeing that. Secondly, what I think is so positive is that the European Commission, in its recovery or stimulus packages, has included this dimension. And retrofitting of buildings, for instance, which is part of the circularity agenda, is one of the major areas of priority. So I think in Europe, we are quite happy. If you go to the United States, it's the opposite. Trump is doing absolutely the opposite. He is putting money into the fossil fuel industry instead. So unfortunately, the same gospel is not all over the world.
Right. Okay. I noticed we've only got about 5 minutes before we have to close, like just when the conversation is getting really interesting. I think I just want to have a brief comment from all of you. What I'm hearing is that intellectually, we have a real vision and an understanding of maybe what the future might and needs to be. We are painfully aware of the basic fact that the system we have is optimized and is sitting in the middle of the room, and everything we're doing is nibbling around the edges. But the clock is ticking, time is short. And I just want to come through to you. I know we'll talk about ecological tax shift, but I'm just trying to work out in terms of who might be the leaders, the people who connect to try and really take this whole debate and action forward, given that it cannot be, given that there are multiple players, but we need somehow maybe that Nordic approach, even further connection, integration moving forward. So I'm just interested, really, your final parting thought to leave with all our people on the webinar in terms of moving this forward, and who may be those key actors that not in fictitious, let's say, oh, well, it's Europe or it's business, but where is that alliance of drive for the next stage of taking this journey forward? So I'm going to come across Stina, and it's literally got to be a sentence or sentence and a half. Stina, first of all.
Okay, yeah, so I suppose reflection from what you just said would be perhaps the large businesses do have a critical role to play, sort of in articulating their need from politicians. So that would be my one-line answer.
All right, Marthe?
Yes, I think, but politicians really need to step up, and they need to listen to businesses and consumers.
Okay, thank you very much. Elin?
All right. Yes, politicians for sure. Research can help provide them with good research, making the right decisions. We need businesses to push them to dare to take these decisions that they need to take.
Right. Anders?
Well, apart from the tax issue, I think what we measure, the methodologies there are very important. And the Nordic countries could perhaps, through research and innovation, help us to develop the right indicators so that we measure the right things. That would be a real contribution at the EU level, but also at the global level, I think.
Right. Thank you very much. And finally, I'm going to come to Tomas, partly because within the Circular Materials Conference, you've got a really interesting alliance of players working together, trying to take forward this agenda. It feels that it's bigger than just the sort of materials world. Just your final reflection, and we will look at all the comments that have come in from the wider participants. So great to have them involved. But in terms of giving that added drive to the distinctive Nordic approach that maybe steps up to the scale of the challenge that we face, just a couple of final reflections and maybe thank yous from yourself.
Thank you, Peter. So yeah, first of all, I'm quite happy and actually a bit impressed by the number of participants in today's conference. So I'd like to thank everybody who participated here. That's my first point. The second point is clearly that I want to thank you, Peter, for an excellent moderation of the whole event. Getting into the content issues, I'd like to send with you a take-home message that I learned from an old professor in operational management. He said at some point, structure wins over strategy. So it means that you've got to have a good strategy, obviously, but if you don't have the structure, or only when you get the structure in place, that's when you see the transition actually taking place or being successful. So if we adapt that statement to the transition we are currently going through, I would say, because I think things are happening, then we can say that we need to have the strategy, and we have a lot of different players all around that are doing efforts to go in the direction of circular economy. I think industry and consumers have a very strong role in showing that it is actually possible. So we need to have the forerunners, and we have a few, but we definitely need more. We also need at some point the structure, and that's what Anders was pointing at. As one example, you need to get the economic system right. But it's not only the economic system. Change management is also about convincing people that it's a good idea, ultimately. And there you have the political system in place. And of course, things are happening, not at an equal rate all over the world, but things are moving forward. So I cannot point at one specific type of player in society. I think it's a joint effort. And I think with the Circular Materials Conference, we as actors in the research, or with our roots in the research community, try to advance the questions as one of our tools in such a conference. And that's what we hope to achieve, that we will push the frontier a bit forward by our effort. So thank you again for participating today, and welcome back next time. Peter, back to you if you want to say something.
Excellent. No, just finally to say thank you all. Been a fascinating conversation, and see you on the 12th of November.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you, Peter. So.
I'm just checking whether we are alone again or still on public view. Perhaps William can confirm the status of, because it'd be worth just having a very quick word. Are you with us, William?
Yes, there are still a few participants left.
Right.
So just one moment. So now it's just the speakers and you left.
Okay. Just there you go. An hour and a half goes at the speed of a bullet train.